as 2016 approaches, we're going to hear more and more about Rand Paul. Actually, as 2015 approaches, and during 2015, we'll be hearing more about him because there are certain people within the liberty movement, of which all of us are a part here on Free Talk Live, who seem to think Rand Paul is a libertarian. And they are under this collective delusion to a very large extent. It gets a little bit annoying sometimes. Inevitably, people will call and attempt to convince me and others on this show that Rand Paul is a libertarian. Chris, I don't know if we've discussed Rand Paul with you on the show previously.
I think we've touched on it briefly. I mean, when we had the election here, we started talking about electoral politics in general, and I don't know if Rand Paul came up specifically, but I mean, he is... I wrote an article at one point. There was an article in the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org, that somebody had written Rand Paul is some sort of libertarian Frank Underwood from like House of Cards. I don't know if you guys ever watched.
I've never seen it. I've heard a lot of good things.
Got to check out House of Cards. One of the best things I've ever watched. But you know, in House of Cards, Frank Underwood is this really ruthless politician. He's a crooked Democrat who basically will do anything, and he's trying to seize political power. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but you know, he does incredibly screwed up things in the course of this, trying to ascend to power. Yeah. And so there were people who were suggesting that Rand Paul was some sort of libertarian Frank Underwood, that he was going to do all this underhanded stuff in order to, you know, scale back the government.
My favorite part about House of Cards, by the way, is the big controversy is there's this this loose woman in the form of a reporter who will sleep with people to get stories. And the female reporters don't like it. So you have one character that people are complaining about, this woman who supposedly sleeps with people for stories, and I don't get
Have you seen the show, or are you just saying you've heard about it?
I'm just listening to interviews and things like that. I intend to watch the show, but I have not watched it. And so nobody complains about the Kevin Spacey character, who is a despicable human being. And every other man apparently in this are like despicable human beings. But the female reporter, it's like, oh, we never sleep for stories.
Yeah, how could you?
You're ruining our reputations.
Possibly portray a woman negatively on television. This really is misogynistic. But you know, as long as you know, you can portray men as murderers, and you know, and look, let's face it. Like, I've had sex for worse reasons than to get a scoop on a story, folks. So,
but okay. So I believe these ladies that they don't do it, but what I see, I believe that everybody else, all the other underhanded stuff does happen because nobody disputes it.
Right, yeah, it's not like politicians are lining up to say, hey, we would never do anything like Frank Underwood.
But they don't.
And I'm convinced that these female reporters who are so upset about having it portrayed that way are probably really upset because they're being exposed.
So we're talking about Rand Paul. And the Washington Post has a story about his opinion on ISIS. There are people who seem to think Rand Paul is a libertarian. Rand Paul doesn't agree with them. He has made statements very specifically to clarify that he is not a libertarian, but yet people within the libertarian movement still continue to believe in this conspiracy theory that Rand Paul is indeed not just a libertarian, but an anarchist who's hiding effectively among the Washington elites, just waiting for the moment where he can introduce more freedom into Washington, D.C., even though all the evidence suggests that there's no truth whatsoever to that particular conspiracy theory. And here's some more evidence for you from the Washington Post. A funny thing happened over the weekend, and this is a few weeks old. While President Obama took heat for saying he didn't have a strategy to deal with the Islamic State, I guess that's changed, in Syria, Rand Paul delivered a pretty remarkable statement. Quote, "If I were president, I would call a joint session of Congress," said Paul, and he continued to say, "I would lay out the reasoning of why ISIS is a threat to our national security and seek congressional authorization to destroy ISIS militarily." So, yeah, not a liberty-oriented statement, because a libertarian,
that's a constitutionally oriented
like
statement.
Ron Paul or Harry Brown or anybody else who actually has some chops as far as freedom is concerned, would say, yeah, ISIS, none of our business. In point of fact, the U.S. government created them by arming, various different groups over all, the last several decades, and the only way to really stop the violence is to, or at least lessen the violence, especially against Americans, would be to remove the United States military from the Middle East, and not just that, but around the rest of the world, and then bring them all home and then hopefully shut down the military. Now, most of them wouldn't say shut down the military, but at the very least, a libertarian-minded person would talk about removing the military from the Middle East. But no, Rand Paul wants to crush ISIS militarily, and there's only one way to do that.
No, he didn't say that. He said if he was the president, meaning if he was in the president's shoes, he would do what was constitutional and bring this to a vote of Congress, because all war powers rest
that
with
makes
Congress.
him a libertarian. No, it doesn't at all.
He didn't say that he would bring them to war. He would, if in the president's shoes, he would go to Congress. He would make his case.
Which is
so you can read this however you want.
Which is not libertarian.
Which is not libertarian, but it's also certainly a lot better than what Barack Obama does, where he just unilaterally claims the authority to go to war with anybody he wants. So I mean, there is, of course, I know it's lesser of two evils. I don't agree with it.
So he's going to ask Congress to back his warmongering.
Wait a second.
Yes, and it's sort of important, because when you have an imperial presidency that wages war without the consent of the legislature, that's a more serious problem than a Congress declaring war.
Fair enough. I'll grant you that. But that doesn't mean he's a libertarian, and there's all these people within the liberty movement who are just, they're head over heels for I stand with Rand, as though he's somebody worth supporting. And I'm sorry, I can't get excited about somebody who's advocating for more war.
You're reading this in a particular light. He's not saying that necessarily.
How can you read it in any other light? The statement is that he would lay out his reasoning of why ISIS is a threat to our national security and seek congressional authorization to destroy ISIS militarily.
Let me restate it. Consider that politicians mince words with an intention of getting
Chris,
both sides to report them.
He's one of these Rand Paul supporters.
Let me restate it.
Go ahead.
So, what the president should do, if the president wants to fight a war in the Middle East, is he should follow the Constitution. We have a set of rules. Those set of rules should be followed. So therefore, the president should take his case to Congress. He should lay out the reasons why people of the United States are in danger from ISIS, and then a vote will be held and we'll decide constitutionally how this is done. Now,
Congress will decide more accurately.
Right. Well, okay. Yes. The Congress will decide. The people, the representatives of the people, will decide whether or not we should go to war. Does what I say, is that much more? Is that a little softer for you? Because it's really the same words.
I don't care if you rephrase his statement, Mark. He's saying he wants to destroy ISIS militarily, and he's going to ask.
Yes,
he is
he's saying
that
rather explicitly, actually.
No, he was saying
he's going to lay out his case, and he's going to ask them to support his plan of destroying ISIS militarily.
If he was the president, he is not.
That's
if he
right.
was Barack Obama, who is in this situation, he doesn't know what Obama knows.
He's a likely presidential candidate, right?
Indeed.
So he's telling you that, look, when I become president, which is my intention, this is how I will pursue wars with foreign monsters.
It's a better way to support to pursue wars.
It is. I agree with you there, but it's still it's something that it does get me irked, right? Because there are people who call themselves libertarians who say, like, hey, I really like this way of waging war, and I'm like, well, no, libertarians are pretty much I don't think that you can square non-aggression and government warfare. You can't square that circle.
You could argue he's a constitutionalist, okay, but that doesn't mean he cares about peace, and that doesn't mean that he cares about liberty or freedom in any way, shape, or form.
That's not what my argument is.
Right.
Listen to my argument.
You said earlier he's supporting the Constitution. Are you saying he's not a constitutionalist?
Listen to my argument. My argument is he's saying if he was Barack Obama. Now consider,
which is what he wants to be.
He does not want to be Barack Obama.
Isn't he running for president?
He wants to be the 45th president of the United States, you moron.
He does want to be Barack Obama. That's where he's wearing his pants halfway around his butt. And
So, listen to me. What he's saying is, if the president has information that ISIS is a danger, okay.
He said, if I were president. That means if he were president, this is what he would do.
If I were the president.
No, it says, if I were president.
Okay.
The contortions that you Rand Paul supporters will go through, the mental contortions you will go through to justify the things coming out of this man's mouth as something relating to libertarianism is so ridiculously transparent. It's pathetic.
I don't know that we can pin Mark with the Rand Paul supporter label. I mean, he's got a pig named Rand Paul that he intends to shoot in the head. Okay, so this would tend to indicate
he's got spots, so he's different than the rest of the pigs, but it's only skin deep.
And unlike the bullet that's going to go through his skull.
He's a good boy. He's a good boy.
He's better than the other pigs.
Yes, that's
that
right.
The
He's going to kill him last.
Yeah.
No, Chuck Schumer's a good pig, and so is Harry Reid. They're all good pigs.
All right, let's bring
Mitch
an
McConnell
actual Rand Paul supporter.
Awful little pig.
We'll bring somebody on here who will absolutely embrace Rand Paul, I suspect, and that is the pizza dude from, was it North Dakota? You're on with us.
Fargo, yes.
Yeah.
Reagan said that the heart of conservatism is libertarianism.
It's ridiculous.
He went
also
on
said that he was going to reduce the size of government.
Right. And George Bush said he wasn't going to
He went on
nation
to
build,
be-
and Barack Obama said he wasn't going to invade Syria.
Yeah, that's my point.
What's your point?
They said, "Oh, I'm a libertarian, I'm peaceful," but then they weren't. You need to judge them not based on what they say, but their actions. Rand Paul says, "I am the standard bearer of reasonable intervention." That's what he says. He says, if it were in my shoes, I would lay out not my case, the case for interventionism, and he would bring it to Congress, whatever case there is. But if you look at his actual actions, because they did vote whether or not to airstrike ISIS, he kept saying, yeah, I'm in support of attacking ISIS. Yes, we need to attack ISIS and destroy them militarily. He said these things. But when it came to a vote, he got up and gave a 45-minute speech against violent interventionism and the double trading that goes on in the Middle East.
I think you're mistaken, because I don't think that there was a vote held on airstrikes. What the vote was held on was arming Syrian rebels, and that I believe he voted against. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that wasn't even something that was put to the Congress, which is why Barack Obama said, I have the power to do this. He was using the same use of force authorization that was used against Afghanistan. The vote that happened in Congress that Rand Paul spoke out against was arming the quote-unquote moderate Syrian rebels, because he at least does see the folly of that you hand over weapons to these militant groups, and sure enough, they end up getting used against American troops.
But the point remains that by getting out in front of the interventionist parade and saying, hey, look at me, I'm the standard, I'm not a libertarian. Oh, no. Everything I say isn't libertarian, it's conservative. And the real reasonable conservative position is to not arm these Syrian rebels. Right,
right, so but it's still a reasonable conservative position to drop bombs on these people and to even remove the restrictions on near certainty that you don't even have to be certain to go after these people.
Pizza Dude, hang on. We'll bring you back here in hour 3, which is coming up next. We got a couple folks that are waiting on Skype right now to talk about Rand Paul, who is purported to be some kind of hidden libertarian, that he's secretly an anarchist.
The libertarian Frank Underwood.
But that apparently he just doesn't sound like one, because he's secretly trying to get into the presidential seat so he can all of a sudden make everybody more free, which of course is just ridiculous. While he may be the best of all the scumbags in Washington, D.C., that doesn't make him a libertarian. Even Rand Paul himself will tell you very crystal clear that he's not a libertarian. And there's this quote, as quoted in the Washington Post, saying that he would lay out a reasoning of why ISIS is a threat. This is if he were president. He would call a joint session of Congress, lay out the reasoning of why ISIS is a threat to our national security, and seek congressional authorization to destroy ISIS militarily. Not a libertarian position in any way, shape, or form. As Mark pointed out earlier, it is a constitutional position in that technically the president is supposed to ask permission to go and do things like warring, which is why, for instance, a war hasn't actually technically happened by its legal definition since World War II. Because, the presidents have not bothered to declare war and have Congress declare war.
Right.
Was Ron Paul a libertarian?
I would say you can make a much better argument that Ron Paul was a libertarian.
But you're not willing to say yes?
Why do you ask?
I'm not willing to say yes.
You right. I mean, so the question is how strict is your definition of libertarian?
Well, libertarians has a very strict definition. A libertarian is one who does not advocate for or support the use of force or the threat of it.
Initiatory
Right.
force.
The threat of force, initiatory force to achieve political or social goals.
So Ron Paul not a libertarian.
Ron Paul is very, very libertarian, I would say.
He's
on the scale of things.
libertarian leaning, and by that standard, you could say that Rand Paul is also more libertarian leaning than other people. But that's the like sliding scale theory of libertarianism, and I don't like it. I mean, this is not a dimmer switch; it's an on-off switch. And if you're advocating for initiatory force, that in my book closes you out of that realm.
There are a few issues on which I would quibble with Ron Paul, but generally I don't think Rand can hold his dad's jockstrap as far as
I knew that would get in.
They're
You'd slide that in.
libertarians. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. As far as his libertarian positions. Why? Were you going to point out how unlibertarian Ron Paul was?
I'm just making the point that Ron Paul's not a libertarian either by your definition. Like, you want to say Rand Paul's not a libertarian, but you gave money to the Ron Paul campaign.
That's right, because Ron Paul was actually promoting the ideas of liberty actively during his campaign.
So which
Rand Paul is not doing.
Would we say that Ron Paul perhaps you supported him because he supports the ideas of liberty in verbally, like he talks about them and that sort of thing? Rand Paul is trying to work within the system to win.
I don't understand your point.
I'm just making the point that you don't care whether anybody wins the presidency or not.
That's correct. As a liberty-minded person, it's my goal to spread the ideas of freedom and the principles of liberty so where people can understand, can process, can embrace those ideas, and hopefully we'll see some sort of a libertarian renaissance at some point during our lifetime because of people who are effectively communicating those ideas. And what we find out is that if you are a liberty-oriented person, you can actually get elected in a place like New Hampshire. So it's not impossible to be a liberty-oriented person and not, and win election. That's certainly a possibility. But I support political campaigns that put the ideas forth that I find are worthwhile, not some sort of slimy scumbag who supposedly secretly supports liberty and he's going to do it someday, but right now he just needs to tell a bunch of lies so he can get elected, which is what many of the people who support Rand Paul are saying, is that, oh, well, he's just lying like every other politician, and I can't support a liar. I mean, I'm sorry, I've got some morals and principles.
When you have mastered the art of political doublespeak as to have like John McCain fans and anti-war libertarians eating out of the same trough, okay? You're a terrible, despicable excuse for a human being. There's just no way that you can do that. And the thing is that somebody definitely gets screwed over in that equation. And my study of history leads me to believe it will be libertarians who get screwed.
Let's bring the pizza guy back on. He barely had a chance to make his point in the last portion.
He doesn't have
a
point.
Go ahead, pizza guy.
Well, I really don't have much of a point other than just to support Rand Paul.
Wow.
No, you say that he lies.
No, I'm not saying that. That's what many of his supporters
just said that like 10 times. You said
he's definitely a liar.
No, I don't know if he's lying, but many of his supporters say that he's lying.
I don't think that's the pro-Rand Paul position either, is to say that he's lying. I think it's to say that he's choosing his words extraordinarily
These are the contortions I'm talking
right,
about.
Exactly. He's not lying.
Exactly
he's just
politics.
choosing words that lead you to believe something that isn't true.
You'd make a great politician, pizza guy.
Your problem is not with Rand Paul, it's with politicians. You just don't like the system. I mean, do you really think we could go from an Obama to a Ron Paul presidency or a Justin Amos presidency?
No, and nor do I care.
No, he doesn't care. This is the point that needs to be very clearly displayed, pizza guy, is Ian doesn't care.
I'm under no illusion
that
Washington, D.C. is ever going to go in a libertarian direction. I don't believe that for a moment, and I don't think anybody who can look honestly at the situation who's of a liberty-oriented perspective should take that perspective.
I don't know why anybody would take, especially Washington, D.C., electoral politics seriously. I don't even take them seriously here in New Hampshire, but Washington, D.C.-based electoral politics are going to lead to nothing but terrifying horrors, right? Because just think about it for a second. I mean, do you walk around the world and think that the most of the people that you bump into are real smart? I mean, these are the voters, right? So they're not voting because they understand what they're voting for. They're voting on, what they've been told is good and different feelings that they have. They have no concept of what's going on down there. They're just going there and voting based on who someone else told them to do at best.
Right, and oftentimes they're going to vote because they were told that it's the right thing to do. Yeah. If you're a completely malinformed individual that pays no attention to politics at all, you should go vote.
Yeah, take into consideration that most of the people who would consider themselves like informed about politics are spending their days watching MSNBC and Fox News, okay? If that's where you're getting your information from, you are sorely misled. And these are the people who consider themselves really well informed about politics. Most people
Those
who
are the
voting,
people that are well informed.
Most people who are voting don't even have the concept of politics that they would get from watching one of those two mediums. So if you think that you're going to ever have a situation where somebody who means well is going to end up in office, I'm sorry to inform you that that's going to turn out terribly poorly.
Well, I don't know which office we're referring to.
Go ahead,
in
Pizza
New
Guy.
Hampshire.
Well, we don't live in a vacuum. And so you were saying, the informed people listen to MSNBC and Fox News, and that's where they're getting information, and that's what the problem is. Yes, but what Rand Paul affords us is an opportunity to have somebody as the Republican leader go on to Fox News and say, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't put people into jail for marijuana. Maybe we should let felons vote. He goes on to Fox News and says these kinds of things. Now, look, you can say maybe he's not principled, maybe I hate politicians, and maybe we just need to wait for the world to end so that, after the collapse, then we can have control because we'll be ready in our shacks up in the woods.
Lots of libertarians say just that.
I don't know that I've heard Rand Paul advocate for drug legalization.
No, he hasn't.
I think I've actually heard him say the exact opposite. So
no, he advocates for decriminalization over and over again. It's always
of
baby
cannabis,
steps.
Maybe, but not. I've never heard him advocate for anything else.
He's not going to get on stage and say heroin should be legal.
Shame
That's
on
not
him,
going
then.
to
Thank
happen.
you for the call tonight. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. Ron Paul got on stage and said that during a presidential debate, and he got applause from a standard Republican audience.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't Rand Paul get on?
What makes you think, hold on, you didn't poll this audience. Ron Paul's people are dedicated. They packed that audience, and they cheered him because he's Ron Paul. They cheered him every opportunity they had. They would kill any poll that came on for president. All you had to do is put a poll on your site if you wanted to have 100,000 Ron Paul people come there and vote for it.
Or one Ron Paul supporter vote 100 times as I did in many online polls.
Back with more here in moments. Toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. Rand Paul has no courage. It's Free Talk Live. We have Liberty Lubber calling from the Midwest. You are on Free Talk Live.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Hey, as far as Rand Paul goes, real quick, do I think Rand Paul is a libertarian? No way. Do I think he's anything like his dad? No way again. Was his dad a libertarian? Pretty dang close, except for the pandering to the whole pro-life crowd. I think that's bullshit.
You can't say that on the radio. We got to let you go, but thanks for the call tonight. Appreciate hearing from you. Some people don't realize that even though we appear on the internet, Free Talk Live is actually a radio show. We're on 160-plus radio stations at various times throughout the week, and unfortunately, we have to have a zero-tolerance rule about that. I wish we didn't. I really do, because I don't care personally about
if you want to curse on the air,
BS.
come on some garbage podcast. And
Do you take calls?
I will next episode. Yeah,
Okay,
I had
cool.
to shut it down for a little while because I had a little trouble with the system, but I'm fixing it.
All right, cool. I'm sorry about that, Liberty Lover. Call back another night and tell us how you really feel.
Maybe James will give me a call.
That was the problem.
Without using the word BS. So
yeah,
shorten that down a little bit, and you can get away with saying
But at least
BS.
he answered all his own questions before we had to hang up on him.
He was ready for that interview.
All right, so let's continue on here. We got Crichton in Louisville. You're on Free Talk Live. Crichton.
Ian,
Yes, sir.
your position amounts to a purity test for libertarianism.
It does.
Yes.
Which I really don't think it's fair, especially coming from someone who does not claim himself to be a libertarian. You don't like the title. You prefer voluntarist, but you don't want to use libertarian because of the
I'll
same
accept
reasons
it.
that
I mean,
Ron
I'll
Paul does.
begrudgingly accept the term libertarian, but it's because of people like, talk show hosts who claim to be libertarian, like Dennis Miller, for instance, which he's not at all a libertarian. I feel like these people who are not libertarian claiming to be libertarian sort of poisons the term, so I don't really, it's not the first word that I would use, but I would begrudgingly accept it.
And I like Adam Kokesh had not so long ago gone over this thing that, he called himself a libertarian and was allowed to just run with that title, right? And was told that his libertarianism was just pure enough, and then he joined the military and went to Iraq. Right. And he didn't feel so good about that afterwards. And he said that he's fighting for the word libertarian to, have this purity test, if you will, of the standard of non-aggression, because he doesn't appreciate that he was allowed to run with the term libertarian and then go into a war zone, And I think that if you do apply that purity test, if people wanted to be counted as libertarians and you say, well, you can't be a libertarian and advocate for a militarized southern border of the United States, you can't be a libertarian and advocate for foreign interventions and all of these different things. If you want to be a libertarian, you can't advocate taxes. Well, I think that you're going to educate people a lot better than sort of giving them this wishy-washy, you generally want a little bit less government in your life sort of nonsense.
Which is why Rand Paul does not like that title. He doesn't like it because it implies a purity test that he does not want to have to live up to.
Because he has no principles.
Well, he does have principles. He just has different
What
focus
are they?
than you. Ian, one of your big issues is that you want to see that kind of purity in your public figures, but your public figures don't have purity if they run for office.
Well,
So
that's
you
not
have a
true. Here in New
contradiction.
Hampshire, we've got plenty of liberty-minded people running for political office.
And you've got a lot more
And I
people
bet
who
they all
have
fall
absolutely
short.
no standards whatsoever running for office, which is why government doesn't work.
Right. So the reason I have a purity test for politicians is because I only have so much money, and I want to allocate that money to the people who are producing a message that is as close to pure as possible. So therefore, I supported Ron Paul because he was actually introducing people to the ideas of liberty in a fairly principled way. So therefore, he got my money. I gave him some money to help him promote those ideas. And I will support local candidates here in New Hampshire who support the ideas of liberty. And many of them, I have no doubt, are principled, liberty-minded folks. The former president of the Free State Project is running for city council. No, excuse me, not city council, state rep, right here in Keene, New Hampshire. I have no doubt that this guy is a principled individual, and so he's got my support. That's the reason I have a purity test, because I want to allocate money to the right people promoting the right message. Rand Paul, not that person.
Well, no, he doesn't claim to be. That's what I'm
Great.
saying. You're accusing him of being disingenuous.
No,
Well,
sir,
he
I have not
specifically
accused him
said
of
that.
that.
We are accusing him of being disingenuous because he is misleading people. However,
I haven't accused him
all
of
right,
that.
what Ian was more referring to then, if I understand it correctly, was the support from people who call themselves libertarians who are trying to assign this label to Rand Paul that he's like a libertarian Frank Underwood, that he's just talking the talk so that he can get into the presidency and restore the freaking republic.
Right, so he can sneak liberty under the radar and somehow pull the wool over people's eyes, and then poof, he's going to get into office and be a libertarian. I don't believe that about him because I don't think he's a libertarian, but some libertarian people believe that about him. Crichton, thanks for the call tonight. Toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. That's 855-450-3733. To me, he just seems like another Republican who happens to be good on some issues, better than some other Republicans. Whoopee-doo. Not good enough, not even close to good enough to get any kind of support from me. Certainly not a dime's worth of support from me, and I certainly will not verbally support him either. It's Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.